Anshul and I worked together tangentially at IBM. A lot of the work that IBM did around skills came from Anshul and his team, and he's actually doing that similar work now at MasterCard. But more importantly, today, Anshul's going to talk about how you can build a data-driven, experience-centric powerhouse for people practices. And based on the podcast episode I did with Michael Fraccaro, that's the Chief People Officer at MasterCard, which is coming out in a couple of weeks' time, I think. This should be a really good session. So, Anshul, over to you. You've got the clicker. Yes.
All right. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
And if I had known this was the final keynote, I would have been more thoughtful and more prepared. But thank you for that introduction, David. Wonderful. I'm here to talk a little bit about people operations and insights and how you can use that capability to make organizations data-driven and experience-centric. But before we do that, given the inspiration from the panel before the breakout, we're going to do a little bit of reflection. So I'm going to ask all of you to close your eyes for a second. And some people still have their eyes open, no cheating. Close your eyes and think about, just visualize the best consumer-grade experience that comes to your mind. All right, thank you. You can open your eyes. Just a couple of volunteers. Anybody wants to share what they visualized? Don't be shy. There you go. A+ response, but all right. Anybody else? Yes, please. Emirates, great. So I think the net is all of us have this vision of best consumer-grade experiences. They probably are in the realm of retail, travel websites, watching a movie on a streaming channel, or hailing a cab, right? That's my inspiration of what we're trying to build at MasterCard for our people practices. And we'll just get our feet wet with some of these exercises. A bit of reflection. My strong belief, always have a clear North Star before you get started. Shoot for the stars, land on the moon, right? The journey and some lessons learned, and I'll leave you with a few lessons and reflections on how you get started. So we'll do a quick activity. In your role as an employee, as a practitioner, you've probably interacted with operations, analytics, insights teams. A word on an irresistible experience you had with that team. Do we know if we have a way of a clicker or a barcode to do that? Is that coming up? But if that's okay, tech issues, agility if nothing else. Anyone wants to share a word or two that comes to mind on an irresistible experience you had engaging with analytics or an insights team member in your company or a vendor? One word. Insight? Anybody else? Read your mind. Love it. Value? Fast. Love it. And as we went through something similar, as I've gone through my journeys, they all fell in similar buckets. Things like efficiency or speed, quality of decision-making, value, and experience, right? Those were the general themes around what irresistible experiences are in companies. And that was sort of the basis of my inspiration as well, building data-centric, experience-centric powerhouses for our people practices. But the thing to keep in mind is that doesn't happen by accident. It needs to be engineered. And there are 3 words that I'll leave you with on how you engineer that. Integrated. It needs to connect the dots across different pieces of the employee life cycle or the infrastructure stack. Scale. You don't build one-off. You build for scale. And speed. You do that in a way that's agile and nimble, right? Realizing this is a continuous improvement journey. So those are some of the key design principles of how we're thinking about building this: integrated, speed, and scale. And you'll see those peppered through examples through this speak. So as I've thought about this vision, my way of bringing it to life has been a journey and a labor of love. And I think about it as a three-layered cake, for lack of a better word. That cake at the top has this icing. The icing is this thing that attracts everyone. It's where people love it. And if you are a kid, you just want to devour it, right? I have a 7-year-old, you can see that. And that comes from insights, things that you drive data-driven decisions at scale, listening internally, but also listening externally through sentiment and things like Glassdoor, and having the right data quality through the right data foundation. So that's your layer of the cake at the top. But then there's a second layer as well, which is operationalizing key processes. And I'll get into that a little bit. Processes that matter to make sure that the insights are relevant and valuable. And then finally, to make any of these things work, the bottom of the cake, which is your foundation. This is something that if you run a business, if you're a CEO of a company, you do need to have certain ways of working. You need to have a strategy, you need to have a roadmap, you need to have a budget, you need to have a way of prioritizing things. HR functions need to be able to do that as well. And operations and insights are enablers to that, but you need that solid foundation to make that happen. And with that enabler, you also need communities. At the previous panel also, we heard about it, employee resource groups, BRGs. But you also need communities of delivery specialists, communities of analysts, and these need to stretch across organizations, whether it's the CIO or your shared services centers, to really build that strong foundation. And maybe the final thing, which is probably the most difficult to engineer, operational mindset. This is not about a big program around a boot camp that you might do or a training session, but in your day-to-day, just like you go and exercise in the gym, how do you make sure your daily behaviors have an operational mindset for every design decision that you make? And as we delve into these three layers of the cake, let me start a little bit with the insights layer. The way we're thinking about this is at every moment in the employee journey, how can we add insights to make them more effective or efficient? I'll give you an example of talent reviews. Every company does talent reviews. It's year-end season coming up. You're pulling together data for leaders and understanding what's working well and what's not. If you can do that at the click of a button, pull together a PowerPoint deck that enables that conversation, that drives efficiency, so it improves the speed of decision making. In terms of effectiveness, one of you threw out the word value. Let's delve into that work example. All companies, and many of the panelists in the last conversation as well, talked about them being global companies. We heard 40,000 employees in different locations. What are the right locations to go after? Where do you want to grow? Where do you want to shrink? If you can have a view of talent competitiveness, talent availability, diversity, location, real estate utilization, all of these things together in one trusted source of data that's used by the finance teams, the HR teams, and the business teams together, you can make much more informed choices around locations you want to grow in. And then the way we think about this is all of this is underpinned by culture. But you need a way to measure culture. And really, we think about this more broadly than the HR function. So culture can be measured through a number of different ways, one of which is brand. And this is not just the employee brand, but the customer brand. What are customers saying about us? Innovation. What's our product pipeline look like? If you're a pharma company, or for us, we have software products. Is the product pipeline moving fast, or is it not? What is the innovation sentiment in the market? What are customers saying about our product? How does the leadership pipeline look like? And do we have a robust bench? What does inclusion look like? These are all different facets of culture that underpin how we measure and improve insights across the employee journey. And when it comes to making this more effective across the journey, we're also listening. And we've evolved our listening thought process to be much more just in time. So many of us are going through year-end processes. Wouldn't it be nice, right after you go through a year-end conversation between an employee and a people leader, you're asking the employee, did you get constructive feedback from your people leader? Was it timely, right? And in that very moment, it's a three or five survey question. The people leader is also getting feedback about how the employee comes together, and how effective are those conversations. So we're trying to move away from annual surveys to these just-in-time sort of surveys. Also, at key points in the employee journey, when an employee is hired, or when they are onboarded, or when they go through a learning course, right? So we have this holistic, just-in-time sort of way of trying to measure things that we think is helping us move the needle here. And ultimately, the people leader is the single biggest driver of employee engagement. And so this becomes that virtuous cycle to drive that effectively. And while we do that, we also want to keep a lookout on long-term trends, right? And well, what better long-term trend than AI, which everyone is thinking about. So we're also trying to understand from our workforce, how excited do they feel about AI? How prepared do they feel about embracing AI in their role, right? And so we can react to those trends. For example, we do these meeting-free days every quarter, and we used one of the meeting-free days to really activate AI in the data learning tracks and give people the opportunity to leverage them, because we were seeing, based on our employee surveys, that's an opportunity area for us. We're using our internal talent marketplace to recommend AI mentors for employees where they see that opportunity. So using employee listening, not just for short-term sentiment measurement, but also to begin to react and respond proactively to what we know are long-term systemic trends that are critical for our business to address. And then when it comes to data quality and self-serve tools, David was sharing with me as an example over lunch that adoption is one of the things that everyone is looking at and is very critical, sees as a critical enabler of. And what we find in our surveys of our business partners and people specialists is this notion of engagement, this social and experiential enablement is something that they're looking for. Things like boot camps, things like ways for them to actually get hands-on with these tools, and that's a critical enabler to that enablement. And what better way to get you thinking and reflecting than a picture of my 6-year-old son, who seems very happy because he had this project to build the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And I spent an hour with him on it, and that tower, it's very difficult to build it, by the way, if you believe me or not. It keeps toppling off. But the project was to keep it standing, right? And so we spent a bunch of time on it, and he was quite frustrated. There was a lot of candy involved in the process as well. Ultimately, we realized, and he sort of landed on this, maybe he should just stuff a bunch of paper in the bottom paper cup. And that's how it's standing. And I share the story with you because while a lot of business leaders and business partners talk about insights and data as what they want, and when they don't get what they want in terms of data quality, they say it's a data quality problem. But that's really a symptom. The root cause lies in either the technology or the process, and focusing on root causes while addressing the symptoms simultaneously is an element of a learning that I think we all need to go through in this domain. And then your son will also smile when that happens. So that's a part of the journey that we've been on in my career as well, in terms of focusing on root causes. And I'll give you a few examples of those as well. I'll start with this example around position management, where in some of our listening surveys, we were hearing that our employees and our people leaders want faster hiring times. As we delved into that, we found that there were approval processes for creating positions that were duplicative. And so we combined the position creation process with the requisition creation process, and really drove down time to hire by 20 days. It's not it's not rocket science. It was a simple optimization of a process, but with massive benefits for the people leader and the employee in terms of experience, and ultimately for customers, because we're able to respond faster to customers in terms of agility and their customer demand. So this is an example of, as opposed to just focusing on the data quality and the insights, focusing on the root cause to help our customers and our leaders. Another example is, how do you measure the cost, and what is the cost of a position? And oftentimes, we all use different multipliers associated with real estate cost and benefits costs, etc. Maybe something fairly straightforward, having one consistent definition across the company, across finance, across HR, across different organizations. That can also be a significant enabler. So while I'll talk a little bit about AI in a few minutes, I also want to leave you with a thought that sometimes the simplest things, consistent definitions used across the company, can also be a big boost and a big time saver for organizations. Another one is target hire date. So we used to ask people leaders to enter target hire date. That was very important in order to project financial forecasts. But using machine learning, we were able to predict target hire date. I mean, we have all the data when people open positions, when they're hired, what types of jobs they are. And we were able to do that more accurately, 20% more accurate. And it also improved the people leader experience because they did not have to enter manual forecasts. So it's another example of how you may need to change the process in order to get better data quality. This is one of, again, as you think about the entire ecosystem of the HR function with tier 0, tier 1, and tier 2, what we've done is, as we look at the employee front door, this is our employee front door pictorial, people are asking thousands of questions. Even simple things like looking at your cases that are coming to you, looking at the patterns of them, looking at which links get the highest hits. How do you optimize your front page experience in order to make that happen? And then with that, what we've done also now is we've put a chatbot at the front end to really scale the self-serve part of the experience. And it's simple things like vacation approval. That no longer needs to be something you have to go and find 5 clicks, but it's something that is integrated into our social platform teams where you just hit one click on approving vacations. And then automation, right? So if you think about different manual activities that need to be done, we find that in our ecosystem, a large percentage of requests are automating or simple things like creating letters for getting a mortgage, applying for a visa, and just automating that can also result in significant improvement in experience as well as productivity. So as you think about the second tier of the cake, optimizing processes, think consumer-grade experience, think AI-powered, but maybe the one thing that I'll leave you with in this segment of the conversation is really think of one system of work, all the way from your front door to if you don't know the answer, go to cases and raise a request. If you don't know that answer, then escalate. This is all one system of work. And if you have the right insights, you can really optimize this one system of work to have a efficient, effective outcomes, but a better experience as well. And what we're doing now is really embedding AI across the employee experience. We're a user of Copilot. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We have personal digital assistants. How many of you use Copilot as an example in your organizations? One more hand raiser. How many of you believe that it's radically changed the way you work? Not that many. And I've done this sort of activity in at least three keynotes, and I've always gotten the same answer. And so the thing that you want to keep in mind is technology and adoption are two different things. And so we've got to go through an intentional change management journey around this that I think many organizations are working through. But I think the places where we have seen the biggest benefit is when we go surgically after use cases where the organization knows that there is value. We're heavily focused on software engineers as an example to help them write code better and faster. We've seen significant value there. We've seen value in something called our internal career marketplace. We see 90% registration there. We see significant benefits in terms of retention when people use it to find experts and find job opportunities. So the places where we've seen the most value is where we've gone after it with a clear business problem in mind and a user problem, a combination of a business problem, which leaders agree is worth focusing on from a change management standpoint, and a user problem where the employee or the software engineer in this case really wants to use the tool as an enabler to solve their own pain points. So if I just reflect on lessons through this journey, and I'll leave you with a few sort of key takeaways. Start with a clear North Star. That's something that strongly believe in. And again, you might go left and right. You might deviate from your intended outcome here and there. There'll be lessons learned on the way, but that's okay. Start with a clear North Star. We all know investments are scarce, and having this notion of crawl, walk, run, having quick pilots, clear, measurable wins that you can demonstrate the path is a credible path as before you scale. And then the final takeaway and lesson learned for me has been around this third point, feedback, 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 right? To get to adoption, you need to get feedback from the users, feedback from stakeholders, and the change management aspect of that will be also more effective and enabled through that. So with that, that was my session here. Thank you so much for your time. And I think David is going to come here so you can ask him all the hard questions.
No, you ask you the hard questions, Anshul. So we've got about 10 minutes for questions. So questions, I mean, straight for me, 95% usage of it's unlocked, isn't it? Your talent marketplace. That's it. That's very high. I mean, I don't know, and you know talent marketplace from your time at IBM, even if it wasn't called that.
Yes.
What are some of the secrets in driving adoption around that and usage of it?
That's a great question, and I have pondered that question a lot as well, because that's a phenomenal number, and I really haven't seen that high a number in too many places. I would say 2 or 3 things. One is really leadership at the top, commitment at the top. I think is so important. And I think it really sets a tone in what areas you want to prioritize and what you don't want to prioritize. The second one I would say is, and I think we've all experienced this, a lot of adoption comes from P&L centers in the company and business leaders seeing the value. And somebody said that, I think even on the previous segment, seeing the value for their business and how it moves the needle for their business. So if you have a capacity problem of cybersecurity skills in a certain segment of the business, and you see this as an opportunity for productivity unlock through having gigs or open positions or short-term projects or mentorship in that area, and you see the value through that and showcasing those stories back to the organization, I think that to me, I think was sort of the critical enabler more than anything else. And then the final thing I would say is just having clarity of, do you want to be an organization that lets 1,000 flowers bloom and experiment, or do you want to be an organization that believes in scalable solutions? And that's something I think is a mindset point that you need to be clear about as a company. And if it's the latter in terms of scalable solutions, then you pick those and then you really scale those.
Very good. Any questions for Anshul? I can keep asking him questions otherwise. I'm more than happy to do that. Oh, yeah, Eric.
Just keeping with that theme of scalability, your second point was crawl, walk, run. So how do you go from walking to running? Because I think that's where a lot of organizations get stuck.
That's right. I think that's a great point. I think what I've seen, let's talk a little bit about when, what are the patterns of where, when the walk to run, that doesn't scale. I think a few things in my experience I've seen where that doesn't occur. One is organizations can make decisions for the short term. And I think the question at hand is, do you want to have an enduring impact or do you want to have a short-term impact? And that sometimes short-term impact is okay. Maybe you don't want to invest for the long term. You want to invest for the short term. There are certain trends that are short-term centric. For the space of analytics and data, I think especially it's very easy, and I think, Eric, you know this better than anybody else, it's very easy to pull together a few spreadsheets and create a POC solution that then doesn't scale. So also educating a broader stakeholder community, including finance, and carrying your technology partners through the journey. I think that's probably the biggest failure point that I've seen in terms of when you invest for a pilot, but because the decision makers don't necessarily understand the implications of that decision. Great question.
Yes, we've got a question over there.
Yes.
Hi. You opened the conversation talking about consumer-grade experiences. I think a lot of what we think about as consumer-grade is personalization. And I think a lot of effort has been put into employee personalization, hyper-personalization in some cases. How are you thinking about personalizing to a business leader and making the experience relevant to their needs?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that maybe 2 or 3 angles to that question. One is, at least in our setting, we're very focused on something called MasterCard way behaviors. This is the ethos of our culture, how we expect our leaders and our employees to behave. Behaviors such as say what you mean, bring different perspectives to bear. That's something that's embedded in our end-to-end employee experience. So to answer your question around business leaders, an element of that also is how do we bring some of this personalization to bear through digital coaches for our business leaders. That's something which would, as you think about scale, we tend to offer coaching to the top tier through physical coaches, but it's the middle tier that sometimes doesn't get that opportunity. So I think that's a high priority area for us. But there are other areas as well. You think about data, and I think this is where the beauty of the space is. The tech stacks have matured to a point where if you think about what would have been traditionally a dashboard with a number of metrics, which only a business partner had access to, now increasingly business leaders are also asking for that information, and you have more and more embedded bots and other capability in those same workflows that are coming from multiple vendors that really enable the business leader to use that in a more agile and nimble way. So those are sort of a couple of things that we're sort of experimenting with in pilot mode right now. Thank you.
Time for a couple more questions again. If everyone's got, I'm going to ask you one otherwise. We've got, yes.
We're also trying to move away from the annual engagement survey, which in the end is also a just-in-time survey because it measures whatever they feel right then, but it's a longer version. And I was curious to know, are you doing multiple just-in-time surveys, or do you do like some kind of a engagement index where you combine multiple other data points? And if you do multiple just-in-case surveys, how do you motivate people to respond to all of them? Because we feel like sometimes it's overwhelming and they just ignore them.
That's right. We do multiple, and it was an interesting trade-off sort of choice as we went through this journey, because certainly it does add workload, or it can be perceived to add workload to the HR business partners. It can cause cognitive workload to the employees as well, right? I think there are a few elements of how we thought about this. One is, let's not add questions. Let's just keep the questions the same, but make it more just in time. So that was one element of the design. The other element of the design was maybe certain questions are just certain surveys which are just in time, like after a mid-year conversation. Maybe those are just pulse surveys to a random subset of the population. So we're not necessarily communicating to all levels of people leadership, only certain levels of people leadership, what the sentiment is. And it's intended to be a check-in as opposed to every individual people leader with six direct reports getting the results. It's only at the higher aggregate levels that get it. That also reduces the change management cost as well as the workload for the business partners. So those were some elements of how we were thinking about the trade-off. In hindsight, I would say it's, as we went over this change over the last 12 months, it's probably been the best time we could have introduced the change, because the external labor market is also seeing a lot of volatility. And in the external labor market, we're seeing dips in employee engagement driven by trends like macroeconomic volatility, return to office, and those kinds of things. So having a much more dynamic pulse of the sentiment is actually very useful in this moment in time, versus being more granular in a more stable environment. So in hindsight, it's turned out to be the best decision, but I can't take credit for foreseeing the future. Great question.
And last question then from me, Anshul. You've worked in 2 organizations that have successfully created and sustained a data-driven culture in HR. I'm sure there's lots of people out there that would love to have that within their organization. What are some of the ingredients that you feel are important in enabling that?
That's a great question, David, and a lot of it depends on the context in which you're operating, right?
Of course.
To me, and maybe I'll share a bit of a story of my own personal growth, development, and how I entered the HR domain, because I am not a HR professional by longevity. I entered the space around 10 years ago, and the journey came through an email actually I got. I was in what we call software and research in a company, and the journey started with me getting an email from one of my senior leaders saying, we have an attrition problem in a growth market, and we want to begin to analyze it. And this was a decade ago, right? Well before AI was the buzzword. And we want to understand the root causes and the drivers of it to mitigate risk, right? And there was a journey in itself that I went through that. But eventually that turned into a highly scalable solution that was deployed across the company. But the lesson I took away from that experience was, it was a business leader who had the problem. It was not an HR leader who perceived the problem or had a 5-minute chat in the hallway with the business leader and made it his or her career. It was a business leader who was vested in solving the problem. And this was a business leader who had a significant P&L to go after. So I strongly believe, and I've probably, that's to me, that's the biggest pattern of success, that it has to tie to what is a key business imperative. And that could be things like culture or other things, but it has to be really a problem that business leaders wake up in the middle of night and really want to solve. I think that's something that I strongly believe in. The other sort of reflection I might share is, and this is, I would say, more recent in the last couple of years, there is an element of galvanizing a community. And it's hard to engineer. It's very contextual. But you know what? Inspiration can really move mountains, and how you inspire people obviously has an element of art to it. But I do think moving the hearts and minds of people towards feeling that a data-driven culture, it's an interesting coming from somebody who has a PhD in applied math to say this, right? Really winning the hearts of people and wanting them to be data-driven can, I think, also be a significant enabler.
Great. What a great way to end it. Anshul, thank you very much. And you make great leaning towers of pizzas. Tower of pizzas. So there we are. Thank you.
That was my son, though, but okay. Wonderful.
Thank you,
David.
Anshul.